What's up, y'all? It's Dev and Igby's Tale. We're from Mtg. We like it in Magic, and today was probably the best day of Dominaria United spoilers so far. There was both quality and quantity. 37 different cards today, and banger after banger. If you're one of the people in the comments section that says that you're not too impressed with this set just yet, then today might have changed your mind. So let's go ahead and jump into it. There's so much to discuss. Now, as usual, we're going to start with the more drafty stuff and build tension until we get to the big things, which really shouldn't take long today because most of the cards from this afternoon were just outrageous. So there's a lot of big cards to cover, but let's start with the small stuff, and that's okay because I'm going to spend the majority of this video just freaking out over new cards. This is one of those spoiler season videos where Dev just gushes for like half an hour. That's going to be today, so it's good that we get to start off the video with some nice, calming, limited cards to talk about. Some of these are interesting, right? Things like Negate and Phyrexian Rager reprints are cool to talk about, and obviously Negate's not just a strictly limited playable card. This will see a lot of play in Standard. It always does, and Wizards will never let it rotate. It's 1 and a blue, counter target non-creature spell. You already knew that because you've had like 12 of your spells negated in the last couple of weeks. So it doesn't matter if you've been playing for a month. You know what Negate does, but Phyrexian Rager might have been a little bit longer since you've seen this, or maybe you never have. This is 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 2/2 Phyrexian Horror. When it ETBs, you draw a card, you lose a life. Good old Phyrexian Rager. Nowadays, I think we want cards like this in the 2-drop slot in order for them to see any Standard play, so I don't really think we'll play it in that format, but in Limited, this is still a nice little bread and butter thing. You'll play it most of the time. Drawing a card's really good. We just saw Inspiring Overseer kind of wreck a limited environment in New Capenna because that card was common. And even though Phyrexian Rager has never wrecked a limited environment, so far as I can remember, it's just makes you a little bit nervous when you just had a card a little bit like this wreck a limited environment, and you see another one like it in the common slot. This doesn't fly, this doesn't gain life, so it's probably nowhere near as good as the card I'm nervous about comparing it to, but still, Rager has been a solid card in Limited in the past, and it will continue to be, so draft this. But there's plenty of new stuff today, too. We got to see big green dudes like Mossbeard Ancient and Linebreaker Baloth. Ancient and 7 mana, 5 and 2 green for a 7/7 Tree Folk with Trample, and when it ETBs, you gain 5 life, so it's kind of a Titan of small business or something like that. You know, it does some of the things the Titan of Industry does, but not all of the things, and that's why it's an uncommon that you'll only ever play in Limited. But it might be important in the limited environment because a 7/7 Trample is just kind of good a lot of the time. But Linebreaker Baloth is a card that could really use Trample. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 green for a 4/5 enlist, and it can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. I would really like if one of these enlist dudes had Trample, and this is the guy that would probably be the most likely to get it, and it doesn't have it, so. But we might still see it. I just think that for enlist to really pop off, a dude needs Trample, and this guy's the perfect example. Bars. We also got stuff like Sunbathing Rootwalla and Phyrexian Warhorse a little bit later on in the day. Rootwalla is pretty cool. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 lizard with Domain, 3 and a green. Until end of turn, it gets +1/+1 for all the basic land types you have. You only do that once per turn. Another cool little threat of activation lizard in the long history of Rootwallas in Magic. Cool limited playable. Don't know if it goes beyond that, even if it can be. A 7/7 with just a couple of triomes out. I'm still not sure how much of a threat of activation this could really be in Standard. You're always paying 4 mana for it, and that's a bit high. Warhorse is 4 mana. This is 3 and a black for a 3/3 Phyrexian Horse with kicker white. When it ETBs, if you kicked it, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token, and you can pay 1 and sack another dude to have Warhorse get +2/+1 till end of turn. So I kind of like the flavor. It can eat its rider, you know, it's kind of fun, but still, this is really solid and limited where it's a hill giant that also makes a 1/1 if you pump an extra mana into it, but you don't have to, you know. And then it's always got this sort of Nantuko Husky kind of text to it, but you do have to pay mana. And I think having to pay mana for an Nantuko Husk ability is kind of whack, but still, it's the lowest amount of mana you could pay while still having to pay some mana. So 1 won't be too bad when you get to untap with it in Limited, and the threat of activation on this is really high. Also got a couple more cards for the Limited Defenders deck, like Shield Wall Sentinel and Academy Wall. Sentinel is 4 mana for an artifact creature. It's a golem. It's a 1/3 Defender, and when it ETBs, you can search your library for a creature with Defender, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle your library set. Nice little tutor for whatever Defender guy you want. This does go into the Standard, like, Defenders deck, probably. 4-mana tutor on a body, like, yeah, I'll probably take that. It's a creature with Defender, so it counts towards all your things that count creatures with Defender. Like, it's probably worth a few copies in that budget deck, but I'm not sure how strong that deck is in Standard. Obviously, this is a ridiculous card, I think, in Limited, to make sure that you get the cards that are most important for making your deck work. But Academy Wall doesn't really care about Defender stuff, but it is itself a cheap Defender. This is 3 mana, 2 and a blue, for a 0/5 wall with Defender. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. This ability triggers only once each turn, so it probably has to trigger only once each turn in order to not be just this massive force in Limited. But I'm not sure this makes it into the standard Defenders deck. But in Limited, there's going to be times where you're looking for whatever Defenders you can find. And you're going to be playing removal in your deck. That's pretty much a guarantee. You might be playing card draw, so every now and again you get to filter to your big bombs or your combo pieces, like the thing that mills them or the thing that deals damage to them for each Defender guy you have. It's going to be really important in draft to filter and make sure you can find those cards. So, again, important piece for that deck. Let's step it up just a little bit and look at some cool removal we got, like Tribute to Urborg, Tear Asunder, that looks really good, and Extinguish the Light, which is very sad. I actually... I'm a big old softy, and honestly, I had to come to terms with this flavor text. It's the most important thing on the card, is the text in italics, and honestly, I had to sit with it for a minute, but the card itself is pretty good in Limited, and I dare say constructed, but I think 4-mana removal is just right out at this point, right? Like, Hero's Downfall doesn't see play, so I doubt this will either, but it's cool. It's 4 mana, 2 and 2 black for an instant, destroy target creature or planeswalker. If its mana value is 3 or less, you gain 3 life. So, gaining 3, pretty cool if you lose mana value on this, basically. You gain 3 life, and that's a pretty good little incentive to kill a 2 or 3 drop with this. But this can kill just about any important permanent in the Limited environment, so I think you're going to play up to 2 copies of this, or possibly even more. If you're like Limited Control, you just play like every copy that you get. So, important card here, but so is Tribute to Urborg. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black for an instant with kicker, 1 and a blue. Target creature gets -2/-2 till end of turn. If the spell was kicked, that creature gains an additional -1/-1 until end of turn for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. So cool little gravy here. Just 2 mana for -2/-2 might actually be playable in a standard environment where that new Seasoned Hallowblade becomes an important card, because this is just going to kill it dry, right? But, there's going to be cases where in the late game, EOT or during your opponent's combat step, you don't mind paying 4 mana for this, so long as it kills that thing. So it's one of these like 2 mana for -2/-2 spells that actually scales into the late game. And I think that's cool. I think you're going to get a lot of people who are like, well, I don't want to pay 4 mana to destroy target creature. That's not really how you need to look at it. That's the glass half empty approach. I look at it more as if the glass is half full. In the early game I can kill a thing, but it's not relegated to the early game. Late in the game I can rip it off the top of my library and just kill it like a 7/7 some of the time. So I think this is actually a pretty sweet little card, but time will tell if it sees play in Standard. You play every copy in Limited. And Tear Asunder is easily the best of these. I think I kind of messed up a little. I'm pretty sure I'll have to cover cards worse than this in the next couple of cards. But Tear Asunder is a new all-star in my opinion. This is 1 and a green for an instant with kicker, 1 and a black. Exile target artifact or enchantment. If this spell was kicked, exile target non-land permanent instead. Whoops. So that's good, guys. At 2 mana, you get Naturalize. But better. Just a better Naturalize. Exiles the thing, which is this just massive upgrade. And, I keep looking at this to make sure it's instant speed, and it is. So it's just strictly better Naturalize. Without even having the kicker, but with the kicker, it's just anything you want. Get rid of it forever. Like, don't underestimate exile clauses. They're very important. I think this card is very good and will actually stop us from being in that, like, Arcane Bombardment, Titan of Industry, big stupid permanence standard that some of us were a little worried about with the exit of cards like Vanishing Verse from Standard, right? This is going to really, really help keep in check a lot of big stuff. And to be honest, by the end of things, I might be a little sick of this card. I'd like to be in a Standard where there weren't a bunch of main deck things that take out my 5 mana enchantment for 2 mana. But now there's this, Boseiju, and even more main deckable cards. This is kind of going to be the new binding of the old gods, I think, in Standard. But There are good things and bad things when comparing these two cards, but I think in a lot of ways this is even less opportunity cost than a thing like Binding was, and a lot of times, I mean a lot of times, it's going to cost you literally half the price of Binding and exile the thing. So just a standout from today, and this was a day of standouts. Tear Asunder is a bad card, and I mean that in the good way. I didn't know how to finish that, so I finished it with cringe. Time-honored method, but let's look at some good uncommons. These are still really good. They got stuff like Electrostatic Infantry, Sheoldred's Restoration. Both of these actually look pretty hype. Infantry is 1 and a red for a 1/2 dwarf wizard with trample, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you put a +1/+1 counter on infantry. I worry that this is slightly too small, but I also worry that it's very, very good. Right, you put a counter on it. So by the time you cast 1 instant or sorcery, it's already bigger than its stats should be, right? It's like a 2 mana, 2/3 trample at that point, and that's pretty good. You cast any more spells, and I'm sure you will, it becomes a 3/4, 4/5, 5/6, and then the trample is going to start to really matter. So I kind of like this guy an awful lot, but I do wonder if he's going to quite make the cut in the Delver decks that we might see in the upcoming standard, especially considering another card that we got to see today. But Restoration is 4 mana. This is 3 and a black for a sorcery with kicker, 2 and a white. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If this spell was kicked, you gain life equal to the card's mana value. But if you didn't kick it, you lose that much life. And then you exile Sheoldred's Restoration because, they can't just print Zombify. I mean, creatures have gotten better since they printed Zombify. But this is... just print Zombify. But I still kind of like this. I get the feeling that I'm going to be picking the, gain 5 life mode on Titan of Industry a little more often at this point, because you really don't want to take 7 to this on turn 4 unless it just doesn't matter. I might take 7 to this if I get to blow up my opponent's enchantment and, put a 4/4 into play. If they haven't affected my life total by then, I might take that gamble. Still, later on in the game, let's say you naturally cast a Titan of Industry because you have 7 mana. This happens all the time. You know it does. You've played Titan of Industry. So they kill your Titan of Industry because you didn't put the shield counter on it. That's actually kind of fine, because for the same price as playing a Titan of Industry, which you already know I have the mana for, I can reanimate it and gain 7 life. Just gain up to 12 life. It seems backbreaking in a lot of situations. So this is just a nasty reanimator spell, and I'm super glad we have it, because I don't know if you knew this, I really like Reanimator. People tell me I bring it up too often. It's because it's really fun and good, and they keep printing amazing cards for it, and this is one of them. Now, we do have some uncommons left to cover. We've got the Uncommon Legends from today. I'm actually going to save one of those till the end, though, just to let you know. But we've got some Uncommon Sagas that look really good, but we do have 3 more normal uncommons to look at. But they're all ridiculous. We got stuff like Phyrexian Missionary, Knight of Dawn's Light, and Tail Swipe, which might be the weakest of these, or it might be the best of these. This is just a single green mana for an instant. A very important card type to note. Choose target creature you control and a creature you don't control. If you cast the spell during your main phase, the creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Then those creatures fight each other. So, sort of fixed Blizzard Brawl, but this is really just another Prey Upon, right? We see this card all the time. There's been many iterations of it. But just a 1 mana instant speed fight spell. And in the moments where you don't really mind casting it on your main phase, which it turns out, kind of a lot of moments that we've already seen with Blizzard Brawl, that having to be relegated to casting a card like this in your main phase isn't that much of a downside. But we'll move on to Knight of Dawn's Light. This is 1 and a white for a 2/2 human knight with first strike. Listen to the bars. If you would gain life, you gain that much life +1 instead. For 1 and a white, you can pump Knight of Dawn's Light for +1/+1 till EOT. So really cool take. I wanted to see white and black knight in this set. I also wouldn't have minded seeing some sort of sideways reprint of Order of Litbeer or Order of the Ebon Hand, and that's basically what we've got here. There's a lot of those cards kind of jammed together. A 2 mana 2/2 first strike is pretty okay. Not playable in standard on its own, right? We had Dragonkin Berserker, and that didn't do anything in the last standard. But a 2 mana for a 2/2 first strike is stout. It's got a sweet little extra ability, you know, gain life, gain that much life +1. And then the pump ability is where it's really at on this. When you add the pump ability to all this other stuff, I think this becomes very close to standard playable, but obviously a deck like Mono White or Boros, right, already has access to some pretty good 2-drops. So I'm still not 100% convinced that a card like this makes the cut nowadays, but I want to at least try it. Now, when I say other desirable 2-drops exist, there's one on the same page as this. Phyrexian Missionary is just 1 and a white for a 2/3 Phyrexian Human Cleric with kicker 1 and a black, and it also has lifelink. So 2 mana, 2/3 lifelink, just in and of itself is okay. But when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, you return target creature from your graveyard to your hand. So it's just like a strictly better Gravedigger in like every single way. And we obviously know Gravedigger is often an important card in Limited. It's almost never important in Standard. Strike that. It is never important in Standard, but in Limited, it's a hell of a card. And I think that's going to be really impactful in that environment. But I think this is a standard playable Gravedigger. I do, you know, just 2 mana for a 2/3 lifelink is going to brick wall a lot of what aggro is trying to do in the early game. That lifelink's going to be important. But if you do wait until later in the game to play it and you're able to, like, raise dead a dude, like, that's phenomenal. So I just like pretty much every mode this card can be played on. You know, just by stats alone and its rate, it's kind of almost playable, right? But being able to get a guy back just really just pushes this card over the top. You know, again, when I said there's better 2-drops in Standard, very likely, I was kind of including this card in the club. I'm excited to play this thing. Now let's get into the uncommon legends for the day. And as usual, not all of these were banging, but unusually, most of them were today, but we still got to see stuff like Nael Avizoa Aranat. This is 4 mana, 2 a green and a blue for a 2/4 legendary elf scout with flying, and it has domain. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. Put up to 1 of them on top of your library and the rest on the bottom in a random order, and then if there are 5 basic land types among lands you control, draw a card. So unless you have perfect domain, all 5, then all you're really doing is putting a card on top. Which is okay, but this has to deal combat damage. It then has to have all 5 basic land types to be decent. It's got really terrible stats for the most part for its mana cost. So I'm just not convinced that this one is made to be standard playable, but it might be fun in Brawl. And I imagine that if you can enable this and look at the top 5 cards of your library and draw one of them, it's intensely good. But the amount of setup you have to get to that payoff is relatively high. I feel like that statement could be applied to Tatyova, Steward of Tides as well. This is 3 mana, 2 green, and a blue for a 3/3 legendary Merfolk Druid. Land creatures you control have flying. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more lands, up to 1 target land you control becomes a 3/3 elemental creature with haste. Still a land. So seems fun and a nice little payoff for ramp decks, but it doesn't actually help you ramp. And there's weird things about it, right? Like you ramp on turn 2, so you go from a 2-drop to a 4-drop. Well, this is a 3-drop. I'm not saying you can't play 3-drops in your ramp deck, right? You want to play some, but is this really the highest value 3-drop to be playing in ramp? So there's that, you know, just play Topiary Stomper, you know, something like that. Topiary Stomper is interesting too because it also has a 7 lands condition, so it looks like you should be playing these 2 cards together. Just throwing that out there. But then you have to, once you get to 7 lands, you have to play more lands. So really, once you get to 6 lands, you have to play 1 more land, then you have to play more lands than that to get even more 3/3s. Are 3/3s that you're just sending, you know, to their own death a lot of the time in combat by that point in the game. Is that really going to win you the game? Because that's what the big payoff here seems to be. Win the game with your 3/3 lands. But even then you might draw dead for the turn and you won't play a land that turn and then nothing happens with Tatyova. It's just a grapefruit and just sits there. Nobody wants it. So I'm not too sure this is too standard playable, but it does look fun. And on a lot of levels, that's what I care about the most. Next, we got to see Garna. Garna's back. Blood Fist of Keld. This is 4 mana, 1 a black and 2 red for a 4/3 legendary human berserker. Whenever another creature you control dies, draw a card if it was attacking. Otherwise, Blood Fist of Keld deals 1 damage to each opponent. So it's kind of a blood artist, sort of, but it's 4 mana. But don't worry. Not the only Blood Artist we'll see today, but I still kind of like this, 4 mana is not too much to ask in some ways. I don't like that it like dies to Lightning Strike and stuff, but it still looks a little bit better than some of the other uncommon legends that we've seen in this set. I do like the idea of being able to draw cards off of this. And of course, I like the idea of pinging. You know how much I like pinging. So just a cool little thing here that I don't think is going to be super impactful, but I actually wouldn't be surprised if this showed up here or there. I mean, just dropping this on turn 4 and maybe drawing a couple of cards, if your opponent doesn't have removal for it, that's probably good. So I don't mind Garna. I think she's all right. She's all right. But let's move on to Baird. I think that Baird is a little bit better than last time as well. Baird Argivian Recruiter is 2 mana, Boros colors, for a 2/2 legendary human soldier. And at the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature with power greater than its base power, create a 1/1 white human or white soldier creature token. This is pretty good. This is pretty all right. On turn 1, you can go like Kimana faces Kakazan, and then turn 2, you play Baird. He's a 3/3, and suddenly he's got higher power than his base power, right? So he counts himself. EOT, you get a 1/1. Like, that seems okay. For the early game, it's turn 2. You get a 3/3 body and a 1/1 for that play line, and there's other ways you can do this by playing like modified 1-drops and whatnot. So I think this is actually kind of possibly playable if you can get online reliably with it on turn 2. Even if it takes until turn 3, it's still an extra body every turn. And even though that might not be quite enough to make it good, it still might be more than enough to make it good. It's cards like Wedding Announcements you play in the standard, so this is making you a 1/1 every turn for a relatively low starting cost. So I kind of like a lot about this. It's fun in Commander, it's fun in Brawl, but I think it might have some standard applications too. Like in terms of what I'm looking for in a card for standard, it might not have much, but it does have the Baird necessities. But anyway, let's move on to Aaron Benalia's Ruin. This is one I can sink my teeth into. This is not, by the way, this is not my favorite Orzhov Legend of the Day either. I keep sending you cryptic messages. You'll see, this is 3 mana though, 2 white and a black for a 3/3 legendary Phyrexian human with menace. You can pay a black and a white and tap it, sack another creature to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So it kind of sucks that this taps, and it kind of sucks that you have to pay mana. Honestly, I'm just going to give you the bad part up front. Honestly, a 3 mana 3/3 isn't the best thing in the world either. They slapped menace on it, so I guess that's something. But either way, being able to put a counter on each creature you control, including Aaron, by the way, is pretty good. Especially in a deck where you're going to be sacrificing stuff anyway. Like, as far as things that I don't like, they cost 2 mana to activate in your Aristocrats deck. That wasn't English. Like, it wasn't proper English. But I think I'd rather play this than, say, Body Dropper. Does that make sense now? Hopefully it does, but I don't want to pay 2 mana to activate Body Dropper, and I don't really want to pay 2 mana to activate this, but I think the upside is much greater if you have to pay mana in your sacrifice deck to actually sacrifice stuff. Pretty high cost of actually getting things going here, but I think it's probably going to be worth it a lot of the time. But still, does it really push the Aristocrats decks as much as I'd like it to? No, but is it playable? Maybe. Also, it's Stannis' dad, which is neat. But let's move on to Balmor, Battle Mage Captain. This is a blue and a red for a 1/3 legendary bird wizard with flying. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain trample until end of turn. Is it just me, or is that kind of nuts? Is that kind of like super good, stupidly? Like, blue-red Delver is probably going to love this, The blue-white Delver decks really look like the best ones right now. They get to play Luminator Virtuoso and stuff, but to be honest, you could play Jeskai. Like, we'll see a land a little bit later that might aid a deck like this tremendously. It actually makes 2-color aggro decks, even ones that didn't get, but especially ones that did, but even decks that didn't get a pain land in the set look a little bit better because of a land we'll see later in this set. Even if your deck just wants to be blue-red, and the tempo deck with creatures in it probably does just want to be maximum 2 colors for consistency's sake, right? But this is just a really good reason to want to be in Izzet if you're going to build a deck like that. If you're going to come off of a card like Virtuoso and cards like Homestead Courage and stuff, this is a fantastic reason to do so. But let's move into what I would call the god tier of these uncommon legends today. I'm going to look at Vohar, Voldalian Desecrator. This is 2 mana, Dimir colors, blue and a black, for a 1/2 legendary Phyrexian Merfolk wizard. You can tap it and draw a card and then discard a card. If you discarded an instant or sorcery this way, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. You can also, there's more, but there doesn't have to be. But you can pay 2 and sacrifice Vohar, and you can cast an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn and then exile it. You can only do this as a sorcery. I have been wanting Merfolk Looter back in Standard for a while, and they freaking delivered, man. Like I said, today's going to be a day of mostly me gushing at cards, pretty much from here on out, because all the cards from here on out are kind of silly, -1 or 2, but this is one of them, man. This card exists in Standard. We know there's going to at least try to be a Merfolk deck. More on that a little bit later. So this has an interesting creature type in that way, but Merfolk Looter, not strictly better. You have to pay 2 colors of mana for it, but whatever. It's Merfolk Looter. It's insane. For all manner of decks, whether you're Control or Reanimator or what, Control decks are extra incentivized to play this because you can replay a rat out of your yard or something. That doesn't seem too busted, right? It's just kind of silly. If you do discard an instant or sorcery, say a card with Flashback, shouldn't be too hard, then suddenly you get to drain too, so it's just sick. There's so many cool things about this card. All it really had to be to get me excited was Merfolk Looter, but now it's gotten me really excited. So that sounded almost inappropriate, but it'd be like that, this card could have only been 1/3 of what it is, and I would have been like, yes, but now I'm going to have to go back to the hospital because of this freaking thing. I just almost can't believe that they printed this card. It's just an ace in so many different decks that I want to build. But there's actually one more uncommon legend, and like I said, I'm going to save it till the end of the video. It's not only the card I'm most excited about for the set, I think it's the card I'm most excited about for the last, however many years. Maybe 5 or 6 years. So we'll get there, but let's look first at some Sagas. Let's look at Braid's Frightful Return. This is 3 mana, 2 and a black, for an enchantment with a read ahead. 1, you may sacrifice a creature. If you do, each opponent discards a card. On Chapter 2, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. On Chapter 3, target opponent may sacrifice a non-land, non-token permanent. If they don't, they lose 2 life and you draw a card. I don't love this, even with read ahead. I don't think this is that incredible, but as with all Sagas, there's the caveat that they might be way better than I think. Way, way better than I think they are, This gets some not card advantage, but still, it pays you back a card. It's at least at card parity when you get a guy back from your hand, so there's that. And if you just skip ahead to Chapter 2 and get a guy back, and then on Chapter 3, maybe you draw another card, maybe, that's not bad. It's not terrible, I imagine a lot of the time your opponent won't sacrifice a thing, but if they do sack a thing, it's going to be because they have a 1/1 token or something, something not that important. So I'm not sure how impactful the card's going to be, but if you want to look at it this way, you could say, hey, Orzhov sacrifice. I'm going to want to sacrifice stuff anyway. I got cheap dudes that are better off in the bin, right? So I might as well sacrifice a dude, make them discard a card. So on Chapter 1, they go down a card. On Chapter 2, I go back up a card. I just give back whatever I sacrificed, right? And then on Chapter 3, I get another card, or they go down a card. So there's actually a lot of card advantage on this. So again, it might be way better than I think. Let's look at the Weatherseed Treaty next. This is 3 mana, 2 and a green for a Saga with read ahead. They all have read ahead, I guess, in this set. You can, on Chapter 1, search your library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. On Chapter 2, you create a 1/1 green Saproling creature token. And on Chapter 3, Domain. Target creature you control gets +X/+X, gains trample until end of turn, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. This is quite good, I think, right? I just talked the other day about these 3 mana ramp cards that go and get a land, that as long as they, are printed with a good enough upside on them, they're worth playing. And I think that this is the one with the best upside in a really long time, One of the most played 3 mana go ramp a thing cards in a while was Field Trip, and that only got you a forest. This gets you any basic land type, which is really important. And it gets you a body, and it makes a thing big, and it gives it trample. There's actually a lot of good things about this card. Again, I'm not too sure. This is 100% standard playable, but these 2 mana ramp things excuse me, 3 mana rampers have been playable in the past with even minor upside. And I'm pretty sure this is kind of outrageous upside. But we also saw Love Song of Night and Day. The name of this card took me back, man. Love Song of Night and Day is quoted in the flavor text. It's a poem, basically, that's quoted in the flavor text of some cards from Mirage Block, really Mirage and Visions. And it's just really cool to see it represented on a real card. But it's 3 mana, 2 and a white for an enchantment, and has read ahead. 1. You and target opponent each draw 2 cards. On Chapter 2, you create a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying. And on Chapter 3, you put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. I don't hate this. I think it is one of the weaker sagas that we'll look at today. I do, but even with the hug effect on Chapter 1, I think it could potentially be playable, but obviously the issue with effects like these are that you're playing it on your turn, you're tapping out on turn 3 for it, so your opponent gets access to their 2 fresh cards before you do. And that is not good most of the time, but sometimes you'll take this. So there are game states where you'll take this Chapter 1, but still creates a body and then makes that body and maybe even something else bigger. So, it's not the worst thing in the world. And I think it might see some limited play, but this is probably the saga from today that is least likely to see standard play. But let's go ahead and move on to both the rares and the last saga of the day by looking at the Elder Dragon War. This is a cool one. This is 4 mana. 2 and 2 red for a saga with read ahead. On Chapter 1, the Elder Dragon War deals 2 damage to each creature and each opponent. On Chapter 2, you discard any number of cards, and then draw that many cards. On Chapter 3, you create a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. Potentially the best saga of the day, and that might be why it's rare. I mean, you get a pseudo sweeper. I'm not sure that 4 mana is, a very good rate for a Pyroclasm in today's day and age, but there are obviously board states on which you'll take that all day. But if your opponent has like a big dude out that you really don't want to hit you in the face next turn, maybe you'll just play it, just get a 4/4. We keep talking about these 4/4 flyers for 4 mana that are just almost never playable in Standard through the last few years. I would wager that this is technically like the best 4 mana 4/4 flyer we've seen in years. in a lot of ways, like it's a 4 mana 4/4 flyer that you can play immediately, or it can be a sweeper, or it can be like an upgrade to the second chapter of Fable of the Mirror Breaker. You can just discard as many as you want and draw that many. It sweeps the board. It, is card filtering. It's a big flying boy. It slices and dices. Again, big red all in one card. So I have to support that. But let's hit the rest of the rares and the mythics here, starting with Vesuvan Duplimancy. This is 4 mana, 3 and a blue for an enchantment. Whenever you cast a spell that targets only a single artifact or creature you control, create a token that's a copy of that artifact or creature, except it's not legendary. So Orvar didn't rotate, and now it's harder to kill. It's the exact same mana cost. I mean, there are subtle differences between the 2 cards, but come on. Orvar, is that you under all those masks? I think it might be. And that's kind of exciting. Orvar never saw all the play in the world. So there's that sad thing. But Commander and Brawl players love it. Some historic players love Orvar. And I'm pretty sure that I get to be excited, and so do the rest of you who are, about getting to keep an effect like this in Standard. And now, again, it's even harder to remove. So I really like this thing. That's all I can really say about it. I'm sure there's all kinds of just zany, goofy tech. And we'll discover it on stream, because this card can probably do some just nutso to butso things. There are problems. Okay, at least Orvar was a creature. So in the Orvar deck, you want to play creatures and then things that can target creatures, so you can copy those creatures. Right, but this is an enchantment, so you have to play 4 of this and then also find room for creatures, and then also find room for spells that target your creatures. So it's a little bit harder to work than Orvar, but again, for that pseudo downside, you get a pretty big upside, and then it's a slightly harder to remove card. So I think it's going to be fun to continue trying to brew with this silly thing in Standard. Oh, and it wouldn't be an SBMTG spoiler video if I didn't tell you that this is a 4 mana do nothing. It probably doesn't do anything on curve the turn it comes out. Usually that's not good in Standard. So there's that. But I still get to be happy the card exists. Anyway, we'll move on. Delay Line Binding here. This is 6 mana, 5 and a white for an enchantment with flash. It has Domain, and it costs 1 less to cast for each of the basic land types. When it enters the battlefield, you exile a non-land permanent an opponent controls until Binding leaves the battlefield. So with a single Triome in play, this is just like a Oblivion Ring, right? It's dope. It's so good. It's non-land permanent, too. So it's just anything. It's not just like creature, artifact, planeswalker, but it's whatever you want. And if you go just like one basic land type beyond a Triome, it costs 2. If you somehow have full Domain, which really isn't that hard, then suddenly it's 1 mana, exile whatever you want. It's like, pretty good. Pretty good card. So I think that at full price, it's obviously garbage. So sometimes you might even be forced to pay full price. But the later in the game that you go, the less this is going to cost. And I think once you get to the point where this costs 2 mana to exile target non-land permanent, for as long as it's in play, then suddenly you've got a really good Magic card in your hand. So I imagine if there is like a standard, powerful standard Domain deck, then this is probably at least a 2 of, if not more, in that thing. But I'm not sure that it does much outside of that specific deck. But, even in its niche, it's really powerful because once you play 2 Triomes, it's a mana. I mean, this can be online for 1 mana on turn 3. And allow you to play, another 2-drop spell or something like that. Like, you could exile target whatever you want for 1 mana on turn 3. Still have 2 mana up to, counter a spell. Which actually seems really dangerous. So, card's probably going to be really good where it's really good. But it's not going to be really good in that many places. But let's look at Myria, Scholar of Antiquity. This is 3 mana, 1 a red and a green for a 3/3 legendary Elf Artificer. Tap an untapped non-token artifact you control to add green. Tap 2 untapped non-token artifacts you control to exile the top card of your library. You may play it this turn. So this is pretty hot. In a number of ways and a number of decks, Commander Gruul players now get like an artifact commander, which they didn't really have too many options for. Pretty cool. Same with Brawl, right? I mean, it kind of goes without saying. But even in Standard, this actually looks slick. And honestly, farther back, when you look at Historic, Pioneer, Explorer, and even, even especially Modern and stuff like that, it looks like you could easily just pay for this the same turn it comes out in terms of mana value. Even in Standard, if you play enough 1 mana artifacts, this can, again, effectively just generate 3 mana the same turn it comes out, which is really interesting to think about. But even if all you do is play like Reckoner Bankbuster on turn 2, this can still crank out like a 1-drop the same turn it comes down, which is pretty important. And then later on in the game, when you need to draw cards and find that big thing, it can help you do that too. At the cost of tapping down some stuff you might rather not tap down. The word non-token on this is kind of sad face, but if it didn't say that, then the card would be like kind of busted. So if you just tap treasure tokens or blood tokens for this, that would be like unbelievable, but it's still a pretty solid card in its current state. Let's look at Rivaz of the Claw next. This card is just hype. I'm not even sure how good it is. It's just all hype. It's 3 mana, 1 in Rakdos colors for a 3/3 legendary Viashino Warlock with Menace. You can tap to add 2 mana in any combination of colors, but you can spend that mana only to cast Dragon Dudes. Once during each of your turns, you may cast a dragon creature spell from your graveyard. There is more text on this card. Whenever you cast a dragon creature spell from your graveyard, it gains when this creature dies, exile it. So I guess that's boo text, but it's still a really solid dude. So again, the stat line 3 mana, 3/3 Menace. We've talked about how that's not great, but fine in this video. And we've also talked about how if you can untap with certain things in play, they become really good. This is one of those. You drop a land, suddenly you play 6-drop dragon on turn 4, like easy peasy. And you can play that dragon even if it's not in your hand. Like if you have like a gold span in your yard or something, you can just throw that down. That's gross. Like I imagine this probably sees some play in like Historic or something, formats where they can still play cards like Goldspan Dragon, This is also really neat though in Standard with like Shivan Devastator, because if you have this in your deck, you can play Shivan Devastator on like 2, 3, 4 mana, whatever in the early game. And if it dies, that's kind of fine, because if you untap with this on the table, you can play it for like 8 out of your graveyard. So that's seems like a cool interaction there. It's just like really neat card. You guys know that I pretty much always pop for dragon stuff. Like, even though we're losing like Tiamat, which would have been super great with this in the format, again, Got to play some Historic, don't I? Because that's really going to pop off in Historic with Tiamat. But I still think this could see some standard play depending on what else we see. And we'll see a dragon coming up later that I'm really excited about. Not even that much later. So I think this is a really cool card, despite the fact that you probably can't get too much value the turn you play it. But, you know, maybe a slightly later in the game you have like 7 mana. So you play this, and then you play a 4-drop dragon. Like, that's not unheard of. You can do that. So a lot of stuff to like about this dude, and I do like all of it. Tell you what, let's go ahead and look at that dragon now that I was talking about. This is Rith. Hey guys, it's Rith, the Liberated Primeval. This is 5 mana, 2 in Naya colors, a green, a red, and a white for a 5/5 legendary dragon with flying. And here's the important part, Ward 2. Other dragons you control also have Ward 2. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature or planeswalker an opponent controlled was dealt excess damage this turn, create a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. What? So what I'm most interested in with this card is, again, being able to, like the last card we looked at, use it the same turn that it comes out. You know, it costs 7 mana. That's a lot of mana, but if you cast this into Lightning Strike or something on the same turn, and you kill an X2, then suddenly you just double dragon them. You get like 9 flying power. So gross. And like, this is yet another thing that it's really nice to untap with in play, but the chances that you untap with it in play are slightly higher because of the Ward 2. I think that helps a lot. Now, your opponent can remove this because it's 5 mana. If you play this for 5 mana, it's likely your opponent has 4 or 5 mana too. That's how Magic usually works. Not always, but most of the time. So they often can play their 2 mana removal spell and still kill this, but it's going to take their entire turn, which is noteworthy, right? So I do think the Ward helps out, but it certainly doesn't guarantee that it stays in play, but it still makes it a little bit better than some of the other things that we've seen so far that you really want to untap with in play. But if you can, and your opponent has a creature or a planeswalker or whatever, then suddenly this becomes just unbelievably stupid. But it's still a 5 mana 5/5 flying Ward 2, even if you never trigger the last line of text on this. And like, that can't be the worst thing in the world. Not the best thing in the world, obviously. But I still think in Naya decks that play trample creatures, or that play, I mean, you don't even have to play a trample creature. You just play big dudes that get chump blocked. And suddenly if your opponent chump blocks, you make 4/4 flyers. That's just, all the card is just kind of ridiculous to me. And there's part of me that wonders if this card is actually just like flat out dumb. It's like actually way better than it looks. But 5 mana is a pretty deep investment, and I want my 5 mana cards to be very good. And I have a feeling this one is. But we have made it to the cycle of lords that we got today, and all of these are just nuts. They even exist, but some are better than others. So I'll start with Valiant Veteran. This is 2 mana, a 1 and a white for a 2/2 core soldier. Other soldiers you control get +1/+1. You can pay 3 and 2 white and exile Veteran from your yard to put a +1/+1 counter on each soldier you control. I actually think that's pretty sweet, you know? Like, it comes back from the grave to give its anthem effect to everybody again. I know people are calling this the worst one, and it almost certainly is, but all that aside, I also know that a lot of people, myself included, constantly clamor for more soldier payoffs. You know, I don't love this creature type, but I know it's a creature type that has been printed lots throughout standard or throughout Magic history. And it really just doesn't get as much support as it probably needs, considering how many creatures have this type. So it's nice to finally get like a solid 2 mana lord that can continue being a lord long after it's dead. So I think this is actually pretty cool and still like more than noteworthy in terms of 2 mana lords. But now we'll get into the really good stuff. Like Leaf Crowned Visionary. This is 2 green mana for a 1/1 elf druid. Other elves you control get +1/+1. And whenever you cast an elf spell, you may pay green. If you do, draw a card. It's a good thing that elves doesn't generate that much mana, right? Or else this would be busted. Just like, jeez. Whenever, just pay a single green mana, draw a card when I play an elf, and then I draw an elf, and I play that, and I pay a green mana, I draw a card, and I play an elf. It's just, that's how this is going to work most of the time. The fact that this is just a 2 mana starting rate to get started is just, yeah, to get off was probably a better way of putting that, but just a 2 mana starting rate to get started is just like making me not English very well, if you can't tell. It's just like how flustered I am about the existence of a card like this, and I still don't think this is the best 2 mana lord for all formats. I think this is probably the best 2 mana lord for Commander that we saw today by a mile. It's going to be good in Modern Elves and stuff like that, but if you're an EDH player, this was the Lord to get excited about today, because that passive, that triggered ability really is just one of the sickest things you could be doing in Elves, especially at a 2 mana starting cost. But hey, it's also an Anthem. In case you forget about that part, because it's kind of easy. The bottom line of text is so ridiculous that it's actually easy to forget this is also a Lord. And it is. The same is true, though, on Valdalian Hexcatcher. This is the stuff of nightmares. A dark shadow reaches across my doorstep. A stranger knocks. I answer and say fearfully, "Who are you?" And he says, "I am your new nemesis." Valdalian Hexcatcher is 2 mana, 1 and a blue, for a 1/1 Merfolk wizard with flash. Other Merfolk you control get +1/+1. Sacrifice a Merfolk. Counter target non-creature spell unless its opponent pays 1. So a Curse Catcher that's better than Curse Catcher. It costs more, right? But it's, instead of instants and sorceries, it's just negate text. It's non-creature spell. So a kind of better Curse Catcher that has flash for some reason, and is also an Anthem effect. A flash Anthem effect by itself for 2 mana is gross. I have no idea how many combat steps this is going to wreck, how many sweepers this is going to just break apart. All your like 1 and 2 damage sweepers that people play out of their boards in like Modern, just almost unplayable now at this point. So just yikes. Like just one of the better cards that we've seen from the set at large, especially if you judge a card's worth or its value, whatever word you want to sub in there, by how much play it's going to see in how many different formats. And I think this is destined to see play in just about every imaginable format. Now, mind you, we have already seen like one really good playable Merfolk, that Dimir Legend from earlier today. So there is that, but there's not going to be a whole lot of playable Merfolk in Standard yet, likely, when this is released. But, however, counterpoint, we already know, in case you didn't know this, I feel like a lot of people don't know this, we're going back to Ixalan soon. Like next year, we're going back to Ixalan, guys. Get excited. We all wanted that. I tweeted not long ago that like, man, we should have given Ixalan another chance. What a great set. And that tweet got like 300 something likes. Tweet did numbers. It's because we all loved Ixalan in terms of the themes. It just really got done dirty in terms of like the power level. So we get to go back there and we know some Merfolk on Ixalan. So this is just going to shoot up in power in Standard before too long. But again, in formats like Modern and beyond, this is just a bomb card on day 1 that just functions. Again, like a Curse Catcher, Spell Stutter Sprite, something like that. It has flash, so it's just like a Jwari Disruption on a body. If you want to put it that way, like if you want to know why this might be good in Standard, even with no, it's gotten me into this position. Even with no like other playable Merfolk, this is just playable in Standard because it's just Jwari Disruption on a body. And like that's kind of good enough, And like if you get subsequent copies of it, then you can either sack them both at the same time to make them pay 2 for a spell, or they anthem each other at that point. That's good. So just kind of maybe the best card of the day, to be honest, for a lot of different reasons. But I got a few more cards to talk about, like Thran Portal again. To me, this is very powerful. This is a gate. Hey, a gate sighting. This comes into play tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands. As it enters the battlefield, you choose a basic land type. It is the chosen type in addition to its other types, and its mana abilities cost an additional 1 life to activate. Now, I've seen some confusion about this. People are like, wait, how does it tap for mana? If a land has a basic land type, it taps for that mana. So like if I choose that it has the basic land type mountain, it taps for red mana. And so forth and so on. So, I've seen some people say this card, they think this card's not great. Card's good. I'm not going to say like, what are you smoking? Because I could see seeing this card is like not great. If you draw it anytime, really turn 4 and on, then it doesn't look amazing, but it's still whatever mana fixing that you need. It's still a basic land type for the domain decks. That might matter, It's still a gate for the gate decks. That matters in certain formats, If you're playing gates and what? Modern Historic Explorer? That has a gate stack. Still. Actually, no, it's Pioneer. Pioneer is the one that has the better Gates deck. I don't know. You'll tell me in the comments section. There's a format that has a really good Gates deck. And this definitely matters there. But I've spent too long on the Gates aspect of this. But in any case, this is pretty cool considering it does fix your mana on any turn that it comes down. And that's invaluable. It's like a pathway for all 5 colors. Again, no matter what turn it comes down on turn 6, it's still basically a pathway for all 5 colors, and that's kind of cool. But at that point, it's just like Temple of the Dragon God, or whatever that card was called. But for the 2-color aggro decks, especially the ones that didn't get a Pain land, notably Boros. Boros didn't get a Pain land in this set, so it's going to have to wait until it gets Battlefield Forge and presumably Brothers War. That's a couple, 2-3 months, So we were assuming Boros might not be such a force, but this is basically, an untapped land on turns 1, 2, and 3 for the Boros decks. And, that's good enough. Any 2-color aggro deck is going to play this card as a 4-of. I would go ahead and predict that is probably a guarantee. Any 3-color aggro deck is going to play this. Pretty much no matter what Pain lands they already have access to, I imagine they're going to play this card in some number. If they're a 3-color aggro deck. And really, the thing to take away from that is that I think this card makes 3-color aggro decks at least somewhat possible. So I think there's a lot of good things about this card. Getting an untapped land all the way up to turn 3, again, especially in aggro, where those are the turns that count, is the most important thing in the world. And this is basically whatever source you might need on any given turn in the early game. And that is invaluable in most decks, but especially aggro decks. So I think that in a lot of ways, this is subtly one of the most impactful cards in the entire set. But we'll get to the last mythic of the day, but if you recall, there's still another uncommon we need to cover. This is Jodah, the Unifier. This is Wooburg, all 5 colors for a 5/5 legendary human wizard. Legendary creatures you control, not other, keep that in mind. Legendary creatures you control get +X/+X, where X is the number of legendary creatures you control. Whenever you cast a legendary spell from your hand, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a legendary non-land card with lesser mana value. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Am I wrong in thinking this is just kind of fantastic? Just a really good card. Again, it's kind of one of those you have to untap with unless you have a few extra mana laying around when you play it, and then you play a legendary spell, and then you go off. But I guess you could, if you had 6 mana when you play it, you still couldn't do anything. If you had 7 mana when you play it, you could play a 2-drop legend, find a 1-drop legend. Could work, but still, it's a lot to ask. One way or the other, though. This, again, doesn't say other anywhere on it, so it's effectively a 6/6. Right? Legendary creatures you control get +1/+1 for each legendary creature you control. And it doesn't say other anywhere. So it gives itself +1/+1 just by being a legendary creature. So it's like a 5-mana 6/6. If you play any other legends, and it's even bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So, again, broken record. Kethis in Historic, Bard class in Historic. But obviously the legendary 5-colored domain deck is coming together in Standard right now. And this is a key piece for it, right? Probably. This feels like an iteration of Prismatic Bridge or something. But it's a little easier to get down and even enable in some ways. But, getting kind of almost a free legendary thing every turn. It's not going to be every turn. Every time you play a legendary guy is just... I think this could just be unheard of value. Again, if you untap with it, it's dumb. It's just really, really dumb. And it's pretty big, too. If you even have a couple of legends out when you play this, it could be as big as an 8/8. The turn that you play it. And that can actually be pretty difficult to deal with. So I don't know if it's one of the more powerful cards in the set for Standard. I don't even know if it's going to see Standard play. I really don't. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if it did. And it's definitely one of the cards I'm going to try to make work on day 1 because it looks janky. Could be janky. Could be. But could also be stanky. In the good way. It didn't make the card sound any better. I mean in the good way. But final card of the day right here. And I promised you an uncommon. I will deliver it to you. This is Ellis Ilkor, Sadistic Pilgrim. This is Orzhov colors. Just a black and a white. For a 2/2 legendary Phyrexian core cleric that has Death Touch. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. Whenever another creature you control dies, Each opponent loses 1 life. So it's a soul artist or like a blood sister, whatever you want to call it. Those are both really cool names, but one way or the other, I just want to scream about this card. That's my analysis. It's just me yelling at the top of my lungs on the couch for like a good 3.5 minutes about this thing. Just the fact that this card exists at all seems like they're speaking directly to me. It's Orzhov. It's a Soul Sister. It's a life gain payoff that the life gain decks needed to replace Prosperous Innkeeper and stuff. It's also, oh my god, a blood artist. Like, it's legendary. It's legendary. What would be really cool is if we had another Orzhov legend in Standard that can get around the legendary rule. Oh, we actually do have exactly that, Retadridic. So that solves that problem. So you actually probably can get multiple copies of Ilas. Or Ilas? I have to know how to pronounce this thing's name because I'm going to be playing it until I die. This will probably be, like, in some ways, my favorite commander of all time. I really could see this becoming my favorite commander of all time. Just my new love, and Brittany and I have an understanding about it. We've already talked about Ellis Ilkor. And she knows. She knows. It's okay. We've discussed it. This is just, again, not just my favorite card from the set. I can predict it will definitely continue to be my favorite card from the set, almost no matter what gets spoiled. But it's my favorite card in like maybe the last literal decade of Magic cards. Just like, this one's for me, boys and Goyles, and I'm sure that it's also for a lot of you. There's a ton of people out there, if my Orzhov love is any indicator, that, the responses I get to me loving Orzhov is any indicator. There's a lot of us out there that will love and cherish this card until the end of time. Just give it to me now. I want to play with this card tomorrow. I want to do it tonight. I want to stop recording this video and don't even edit it and start playing with this card. So I can't, like I said, I can't do anything but gush about it. There's a million things you can do in Standard with it. We'll do them all. I just cannot wait. And I'm sure it'll get Play with Fired on turn 1 and Fading Hoped on turn 2 or whatever. Like, all the time. I know it's going to happen. Not going to keep me off this card. I love it way too much. This is the card, y'all. This is the card. This is the card that makes me believe in Magic the Gathering again. I still did. But it's like, if there was one card, like if I had quit Magic the Gathering and I saw that this card was coming into Standard, you hooked me. I'm done. I'm done for life. You got me, Wizards. Just like, Lord above. There's just, I can't do any amount of freaking out about this card that properly illustrates how much I am actually freaking about this card in my head. So just know that I'm very happy it exists. This is the one. This is the one. Just, ask yourself if you've ever seen me happier about a card than this. Like, I'm tired. We're late into spoiler season. I haven't slept. What is life? This card, though, this is rejuvenating. This card is a big cup of coffee that I didn't even drink. Somebody just threw it in my face. Have this. And I'm like, yes, I'm awake. I'm alive. This, good Lord. Just the fact that this card exists makes me happy. It just makes me a happier person inside. I got a new piece of my soul added now that this card exists that wasn't there before. I love it, if you can't tell. So that's all the cards from today. My camera's blinking at me. Just let me know what you like today. Obviously, the last card's really good, but there's a lot of ridiculous garbage. Like I said, if you didn't like the set before, anything from today change your mind, a lot of good stuff. But let me know all your feelings about it down there in the comments section. Check out the Twitch streams, all of that stuff. Patreon, all the links in the description, ? Check it out. All the other spoiler videos we've done too are going to be down there in the description as well, so check those out. Aside from that, like the video, subscribe if you haven't done it yet. There's a few more days of spoiler season and then all the decks and stuff. We'll get to it. You want to be here for that. Sub if you haven't done it yet. And I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind. That card, it's so... Why is it so good?